Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Tansey, and I have brought together a very distinguished group of my friends and colleagues for this panel presentation, all of whom are working directly with physicians, and we're just very pleased to be with you today. I do want to say in advance, with an apology, that there's a lot of material in this presentation, so I'm going to suggest that you kind of listen with your heart more than with your head. The slides have been uploaded if you want to review them along with our bios and so forth. So some of the slides are busy. Again, listen for what suits you, strikes you. This is really meant to be a phenomenologic approach to this topic, and we're sharing a lot of little vignettes and thoughts in addition to techniques and methods that we use. So my guess is that there will be something here a little bit for everyone, but also my hope is that this does a good job demonstrating what a phenomenologic approach can look like for those of us who are doing logotherapy directly with our clients and with our patients, and then want to turn around and present that qualitative information to our community for support of the validity and the empirical importance of logotherapy in the trenches, so to speak. Frankl's concern for the profession of medicine was, of course, very personal. He said of himself, "I wanted to be a good doctor. I hope I was no bad doctor, but finally I wanted to remain a human being. I still try." In writing to his physician colleagues in The Doctor and the Soul, he says, "What really is the doctor's condition? What gives meaning to their activities? Practicing all the arts of medicine? Giving an injection in this case, or prescribing a medicine in that? To practice all the arts of medicine is not to practice the art of medicine. The indispensability and irreplaceability, singularity and uniqueness issue from the person and not on the job itself." The literature on physician suffering churns through a lot of different concerns today: shame, perfectionism, burnout, moral distress, substance abuse, suicide. We are leaving the workforce early despite critical community needs and our years of training. The problem is not an absence of idealism. Our psychiatric colleague, Tracy Gunter, noted that physicians often see medicine as a personal calling. But when the difference between lived experience and the expectation of practicing medicine is great and irreconcilable, idealism and calling may then serve as drivers of physician suicide. Lived physician experience, now in increasingly commodified and industrialized healthcare machines, is often dehumanizing, depersonalizing, oppressive, and unjust. In such a setting, it is normal that physicians experience existential distress. Negative emotions, sadness, anger, guilt, shame, regret are normal in these often abnormal human situations. Our use of the term life cycle underscores that life offers tensions in developmental stages of existence. For the physician life cycle, from medical school through retirement, growth through these tensions happens only if physicians leverage the tension as an orientation to meaning. By brief introduction, let me introduce our panelists. Dr. C.Erwin is Director of Medical Humanities at Texas Tech. Dr. Joanna Romero-Cartaya is a psychologist with the Cartaya Clinic in Humanistic and Behavioral Psychology in Iowa City. Dr. Gabriela Carrasco is an adult and geriatric psychiatrist in private practice in Iowa City, and I'm a psychiatrist and ethicist with Virtue Medicine, also in Iowa City. From our experienced practices, we offer a phenomenological window to our work with physicians, the growth themes, common neurotic responses, and logotherapeutic interventions that spark diverse, creative, and defiant will to meaning throughout the physician life cycle. Cheryl, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm C.Erwin, and I'm going to talk about the beginning of the physician's journey, starting with medical school. For many medical students, medical school feels like a tightrope act. Let me introduce you to Crystal, a beautiful first-year medical student whom I worked with over several years. Crystal came to me through the medical humanities program and began to share her own experiences in a class called narrative medicine. As a group, we read about the challenging clinical cases from the patient's point of view. The conversation around women's issues started with a reading about the meaning of breast cancer, mastectomy in a young woman, but the students quickly broadened it to include the many challenges of pregnancy. As you can imagine, the conversation got very interesting when Crystal volunteered that most students in that room did not really have experiences that mirrored her own. She shared her experience with an unexpected teenage pregnancy and why she chose not to keep and raise the child. She was experiencing a personal sense of failure and shame. In telling her story, Crystal admitted that she was fatalistic about her chances of overcoming the shame that she felt because of what had happened in the past. She felt like an ethically and socially damaged woman who would always be a failure. The growth challenge for Crystal was being both fully authentic and fully present for herself and the future patients she would encounter. She realized the need to voluntarily own her responsibility for the authentic and unavoidable suffering caused by a teenage pregnancy. In working with Crystal, I encouraged her to share her story to a sympathetic group of peers. The group was incredibly kind and understanding in a way that allowed her to reframe her current life and find new meanings. Privately, I encouraged her to take responsibility to find her own unique purpose, meaning, and freedom. As she spoke, the mood in the room shifted from shame to understanding and then to compassion. When the class was over, many of the students, both men and women, lingered in the hallway to thank Crystal for sharing her story and told her how they could see the humanity of tragedy. It was a turning point for Crystal to see herself as able to see the nobility in unavoidable suffering. Life can always have meaning, even when it is not fair or not what we planned. The very next year, Crystal found herself pregnant again in spite of taking every medically reasonable precaution. Now the stakes were higher. And while she accepted her own behavior, she also knew her heart was telling her she could not go through that old pattern again. Frankl tells us the guide to which guides man in his responses to the question life puts is in his taking responsibility for his life, its conscience. Crystal was confronting her own conscience. Crystal's go-to response style was fatalism, but in this situation, her heart spoke more strongly than her sense of helplessness. The task ahead was to find a plan. Crystal needed to find her own will to meaning in this situation. The growth challenge now was accepting the hard work that was in front of her as a single mother and medical student. As a clinical strategy, I encouraged Crystal to face her own worst fears and focus on others. Some of the questions that I asked her to consider were, what is the hardest part of this for you? What do you know about yourself from the past? What parts do you want to do the same or differently? I encouraged her to de-reflect. What is the good that can come out of this for other people? How would that make you feel in turn? Crystal's creative response to this approach was to choose to respond from her creative values in a way that enriched her life and gave productively to the life of her child and family without feeling shamed or coerced into an inauthentic choice. She also chose the topic of how to support single mothers in medical school for her capstone thesis project. While going through medical school pregnant, Crystal wrote of her new attitude in her thesis project. I learned to give no attention to the comments of those who are not able to exercise the moral imagination needed to empathize with the situation. We both were so happy with this outcome, not realizing the change in circumstance and location that comes with residency would provide yet more opportunities for responsible choices. Perfectionism is held as the standard for residents, especially first-year interns. Crystal was now juggling single mother infant care with residency. Unfortunately, the institution where she was working did not offer any flexibility. On the day of her custody hearing, her employer refused to allow another resident to cover for the 2 hours she needed to be on a Zoom call with the court. The court refused to reschedule. Predictably, it led to burnout. It also led the court to deny her request for full custody, noting that she was, quote, too busy to be a good single mother. The challenge for Crystal in the early years of residency was how to handle the diminished autonomy that some employers enforce. It is an unnatural condition for medicine to abandon compassion for a young mother who requests time to fight for her child. Crystal needed to find a way to respond to an untenable circumstance. Crystal fell back to a fatalistic response in this circumstance. She was trying to stay stable, but was unable to maintain her mindfulness routine. The rules of medicine were written for a time and place that no longer exists, and we are just now admitting that reality. There's a lot of work to be done to change this culture, but Crystal needed to find a path forward in the present. When trying to maintain stability failed, giving up and falling apart may have been understandable, but it did not help either her performance in surgery or at home. My strategy for this situation was Socratic. This is really a deep awareness that I'd like to think of as just being there for your coachee. It's more of an attitude and a presence than it is a formula. Some of the questions that worked for Crystal in this situation were to ask, what are your core values? What is the one thing you would not give up? What does it mean to be responsible for your son? How would you meet the things that are most meaningful if you could rebound and rebuild in new ways? Crystal chose radical acceptance of the way that medicine is currently structured. It is more a loss for medicine than it is for Crystal. Crystal did not want to give up the practice of medicine. It formed a core part of her identity. She chose to accept the necessary suffering, though, and focused her energy on making her son's life as good as she could make it. This meant she could not move away from the city where she was living to take better job opportunities. She willingly followed the restrictions placed on her by the courts and transcended her desire to pursue the career in medicine she had planned since the age of 16. She was able to complete the rest of the residency year and obtain her medical license, but was placed on probation at her institution. Crystal chose to pursue a business degree so that she could help other women who are in medicine. Crystal had accepted the limits of a medical system that could not accommodate the needs of single mothers. Crystal's growth challenge now is finding her own path to being both fully authentic and fully present for creative work that allows her to take responsibility for her own freedom to meet life's challenges. My clinical strategy was one of paradoxical intention. When she was prepared to accept the worst, her original dream of practicing medicine lost the power that it had had over her. By making self-reflective choices through several life challenges, Crystal found her will to make a meaningful life out of a series of unavoidable sufferings. Crystal's ultimate response to this suffering was one of transcendence. She no longer needed neurotic responses. She realized that the meaning of her life was larger than one path that she had chosen years ago. The path that life seemingly chose for her now held all the meaning she needed. I could never have imagined how much it means to me to have time with my family. I will do anything to have a whole life. The last time I spoke with Crystal, she was in an airport on her way to consult a health system in Peru. She was happy, grateful for the coaching support that lasted longer than either of us anticipated, and reported a happy 5-year-old who was the pride and joy of his grandparents. On this next to the last slide, I want to just summarize the logotherapy techniques that I was using. These are the themes of my work with Crystal and some of the ways that logotherapy provided a light for this very, very unexpected path through life. Some of the questions that I posed to Crystal on the next slide were especially helpful on this journey, and I want to share those with you, and you can download these slides and have these questions if they're helpful to you. I hope that they are helpful to you. I hope that Crystal's story illustrates how powerful logotherapy can be for your clients. And I thank you. If we could just save the questions for the end of the panel, I'm now going to turn over the presentation to my colleague, J.R.Cartaya. Thank you.
I have to unmute myself. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I'm very excited to be speaking with you in this international space. And so early career physicians are in that residency through maybe about like 8 to 10 years into their career. And so I'm just going to start off by reading just a couple quotes to kind of get some of the themes flowing in this presentation. And so some of the things that I hear from my clients are, I'm striving to become a chief resident and I know what I need to do to get there. My husband and I are living in separate places as his job is in another city. I want to spend time with my spouse, but sleep often wins. I'm advancing to be more independent and begin procedures on my own. My department chair is on me. I have so many irons in the fire. I'm behind on 300 notes and I got a full weekend to do nights. I put in my preferred time off and my work schedule and got none of it. My supervisor or my attending told me that I needed to work on my professional communication. I'm feeling really burned out and worried that my co-residents don't like me and are talking behind my back. I'm worried that I'm letting others down as they are having to cover my shifts as I'm not feeling well due to my pregnancy. Next slide, please. So the road to the early career piece of the thing is really long. Oftentimes, residents are super excited to get to their placement and begin to grow those skills as they develop their autonomy. They're doing more procedures. They're seeing themselves really grow into the physicians or surgeons that they want to be. In addition to that, juxtaposed is they're planning their families, they're getting engaged. Maybe they've already had a child or two. Their relationships with their parents have changed. Maybe their parents live in an entirely different city or state from them, and that sometimes is really hard. They're juggling all these different training schedules. So sometimes they're juggling up to 60 to 80 hours a week and then trying to figure out how to have family time or friend time, how to be a good community player, while also under being evaluated, even being professionally evaluated as they're trying to grow in their careers or in advancing in their careers. And oftentimes the on the last rung is how they're meeting their professional identity in all of this, because so much of their energy is going into who they're going to become in this physician stage, and all those dreams kind of coming to a head with the reality of the environment and the situation that they're in that sometimes doesn't support, or oftentimes doesn't support their personal values. Next slide. And so in the different themes that kind of come up around this is oftentimes a lack of choice or a lack of boundaries. Culturally, there's a hierarchy of how one is to respond. And often it's if you're told to do something, the expected response is yes, and I will do it immediately, or yes, I'll do it ASAP. Right now, we're in a culture of having cell phones, even cell phones that are being used for work-related things. And so someone's getting pinged or texted from a nurse or maybe from an attending or a colleague that's needing something, in addition to maybe 15 other requests that are all happening at the same time. And someone needs to respond. And they need to be pretty tight about what roles they're doing in patient care, patient safety, things like that. So a lot of times what happens is that there's a loss of their identity, the things that they value, the things they want, or even ways that they would speak up, the ways that they would just talk or respond, because they're also trying to respond culturally to what's happening in cultural norms within the system. That it's sometimes if they don't have that just right amount, it can create a lot of professional issues, especially in communication, because these communications are happening in a pretty stressed environment. It's not unusual that within this early career stage that I'm beginning to see beginning stages of burnout. People are getting crispy. They might be getting pretty irritable at times. And then we're trying to figure out, how do we manage those responses with all this stuff going on? And sometimes they're being pushed to the extreme. There's a lot of fear of evaluation, how others perceive them, how nursing staff might be perceiving them, how their colleagues are perceiving them, how fellow residents are perceiving them. There's just a lot of energy that they're constantly juggling in their minds, in addition to the patient care procedures, things like that. And so when I think about the neurotic responses to this, and oftentimes that neurotic triad of aggression or power, addiction, pleasure, workaholism, like these individuals are high achieving. They want to make a change in our world. They really want to serve other people. And because of all that striving, and from medical school on, they're so used to trying to put themselves behind while they're advancing their professional goals, which again makes them susceptible to some of those vulnerabilities of addiction pieces. And what I mean by that is workaholism. And that often leads to that feeling of depression, or final stage of that neurotic response. The environment is asking them to conform a lot of times. There's a lot of pushback if they don't conform to things, or if they are that outspoken person. Usually there's a lot of cultural messages to kind of come back. Or a provisory attitude is this kind of, not necessarily within their work, but within their personal life, this drifting kind of aimlessly. They're only interested in what's going on in the here and now. They're putting maybe things off in their personal life. Like I will do that later. It's not as important right now, even though these choices might lead down the road to drifting from a spouse, or drifting away from their children, drifting away from the things that really truly matter to them, or that they find ultimate meaning in. Fatalism, that there isn't a lot of choice, right? Like there's this idea that things in some ways within this medical system are predetermined, and they're trying to fit into it. They don't have full say of what they're going to do. And this oftentimes leads to doubt and despair of whether, did I really pick the right career for me? Should I be doing this? Like, how am I losing myself in all of this? And then there's hopelessness and anxiety that comes with that as well. Next slide. And so some of the quotes that just really stood out to me as I think about the folks that I serve, that I think do a good job of kind of putting this in, is a second-year resident who said, "I'm so tired and exhausted, and yet I have nurses and attendings and patients coming at me all at the same time, even when I'm trying to focus on an important issue or patient care. And I'm expected to be kind, to be open and professional at all times." And so this is maybe even coming off after like working a 55-hour shift within a 72-hour time span. And so they might have not gotten any sleep. Residents may get an hour or two, depending on how things flow, or they may not, and they're just expected to go. And so there's not a lot of thought in the moment about what it is that's happening to them or what they're experiencing, because their focus is on the here and now, as it needs to be. It's only later on, when they get the space, that they're realizing how the expectations really are almost aggressive to their psyche and who they are as people, or it's extremely grueling, and just inhumane is another word I hear a lot. Inhumane environmental impacts. Next slide. And so another second-year resident too, like the second-year residents that I see just have really prolific quotes. I feel like a wet rag that's been wrung out, and someone continues to try to wring, even though all the water has been wrung out. And so this idea of being fully emptied of all the space that they have within themselves to keep going, but yet they have to find that, like, not even a last drop to keep going. And again, like, what is the violence in some ways that's happening behind the scenes to an individual as this is happening to them? Because they're so committed to helping others, they're so committed to the practice of medicine, that it's almost unbearable in the way that they have to give up who they are, the feeling of having to give up who they are in order to make this practice happen. Next slide. And so a lot of the time I really focus on thinking of what is in the heart of the matter. If we could give you space, if we could give you time to think, if I could ask you questions that would do away with all the environmental stresses right now, and we could really focus down on what's happening, how can we connect to yourself, how can we connect to the most authentic parts of who you are with courage and love, and awareness. And so when I ask questions of, and I invite you to kind of think about this for yourself too, as I'm talking, but what is one of your heart's deepest longings right now in this moment? What do you long for the most in your life? Right? What is a private and vulnerable truth about you that you don't normally share? What is a strong value or conviction you have that you're willing to sacrifice for? And I think when we're asking some of these questions, the core of who someone is begins to bubble up, and they begin to recognize their truth, and their truth in ways that maybe the environment doesn't support, right? I think Viktor Frankl does a wonderful, beautiful job of talking about how our circumstances in life, like they're not as important as how we view or how we're seeing ourselves, what our individual choices are, what is our responsibility to this moment, and how do we join in that moment with full choice of who we are, regardless of the circumstances, that there's always options no matter where we're at. And so, and that's really the heart of what I'm coaching towards in order for them to get some of that space in this environment. Next slide.
Joanna, you're at time, so I'll let you wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah. And so the way that I do this with people is oftentimes to read this quote by Viktor Frankl that I think is absolutely beautiful in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. One evening when we were already resting on the floor of our hut, dead tired, soup bowls in hand, a fellow prisoner rushed in and asked us to run out to the assembly grounds and see the wonderful sunset. Standing outside, we saw the sinister clouds glowing in the west and the whole sky alive with clouds of ever-changing shapes and colors, from steel blue to blood red. The desolate gray mud huts provided a sharp contrast, while the puddles on the muddy ground reflected the glowing sky. Then, after minutes of moving silence, one prisoner said to another, "How beautiful the world could be." And so just thinking of that perspective of finding beauty, even when things aren't beautiful. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking about the mid-career folks. These are some direct quotes as I pulled some of my case files. My life as a doctor is being told every day, we own you. I'm exhausted, and all I do is recursively recalibrate. What a waste. How do I stay a good person in this kind of dystopian circus? Being a doctor is like being a battered spouse. Medicine is like the Titanic. They just rearrange the deck chairs when we should be running for the lifeboats. Loyalty is a core value, but they force me to betray my oath. My main job these days is hypocrisy accounting. I'm just a whore that they've pimped out. In the mid-career, I see themes of disillusionment with privilege and status, which they found, but is empty or fragile. Disillusionment with power, justice, money and materialism, scientism and technology. I also see pseudo-stoicism, in which physicians are disconnected from painful emotions, often a veneer over primary and secondary trauma, burnout, and compassion fatigue. I see a sense of isolation and alienation, even in chaotic environments that are full of people or with families at home and communities that respect them. In addition to fatalism, tranquilization, I want to particularly highlight the presence of fanaticism in this developmental stage, which is evident in some of the previous quotes when they talk about the others, they, the oppression of the they. And I often ask in session, who's them? Who's they that you're talking about? In mid-career, some physicians become increasingly tribal, seeing themselves as put upon or oppressed by administration or administrative tasks, hospital billing, medical records, nurses, and systems. They often feel victimized, and they begin to agitate against a group of others, demanding justice for me as due or promised for their years of service and sacrifice. In the next few slides, I'll highlight some of my most important logotherapeutic interventions for disillusionment, pseudo-stoicism, and alienation with fanaticism. First, building courage and insight around the emotions associated with suffering. Second, urging the wisdom of the middle way. What is just right anger? How can you thread the needle in a world full of wicked problems, something between checking out and burning the place down? 3, recalling physicians to leadership and love. If you leveraged your years of experience into becoming a role model, how would you lead differently? What does a solid team look like? What is your responsibility for building a team? How could you work to build a community, resisting a dehumanized collective? The virtue ethicist and neo-Stoic Martha Nussbaum notes that emotions are intelligent parts of the personality that can inform and illuminate as well as motivate. Like Aristotle, emotions can be cultivated for a virtuous character. My experience is that physicians supported for insight and compassion to the depth and breadth of their suffering emotions find that they can begin to discard tranquilization and planless days in favor of meaning, informed and illuminated by the painful emotions themselves. That is, that this suffering is not empty, it is not meaningless, and that the suffering and the doctor that experiences it does matter. It is Aristotle who reminds us that anger can be just, but wisdom in anger is not easy. Anybody can become angry. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everyone's power. That is not easy. For my physicians, emotional intelligence means both honesty about their suffering emotions and thinking about performing them for the right purpose, degree, and way. And this is Aristotle's golden mean, or what many traditions call the middle way. Elizabeth Lucas speaks to this. Neither the crass egoist, who is incapable of taking a step beyond the self, nor the I'd gladly be a martyr who wants to do everything right. While the egoist refuses helps out of indifference, the I'd gladly be a martyr type will share indiscriminately and uncontrollably with everyone until he or she is exhausted. Often the ideal lies in between, performed in the right place and at the right time for something or some person who needs it, which brings us to thinking about love. And so we turn our mid-career physicians who are especially prone to victim tropes and fanaticism back to the community of being responsible persons together. To build community is to build justice. It is a powerful outlet for righteous anger. To embrace complexity is to enrich their meaning possibilities. William Blair Gould said in a lovely piece in our own forum in 1987, the more choices you see in a situation, the more meaning becomes available. In teamwork, there's a greater discerning of possibilities and choices from the complexity of the many, bringing depth and richness to a discerning justice. My mid-careers, often leaders in title, but not in spirit, need the meaningfulness of community as an antidote to existential distress in today's commodified healthcare industry. Frankl said, true community is in essence the community of responsible persons. As an ethical object, man begins to be human only where he has the freedom to oppose bondage to a type. The answer is not fanaticism. And as Joanna pointed out, it's also not conformity. It is freedom. It is leadership and freedom for freedom of oneself and others around us. Anticipating our last panelist, Dr. Cherascu, I just want to note that as physicians age, they have to come to terms with the fact that just because they're very experienced doesn't mean they're wise. And in my mid-careers, I'm often asking them to think about how they can use their experience towards wisdom, using those logotherapeutic interventions of community, love and leadership, emotional intelligence, and a discriminating cunning for the middle way. Gabby.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I come with good news. Most of my colleagues, patients, and clients made it. They are still practicing medicine. And now they reach the stages of late career and retirement, stages marked by new and different type of challenges. And I will start with a few facts. According to the American Medical Association, about 12% of the doctors retire before the age of 60. And most of them, about 60%, retire between the age of 60 and 70. Of course, not retiring is also an option. And I myself have met a handful of doctors who basically never retire for, for many reasons, which I'm not going to talk about right now. Some changes have been noticed lately, and according to the Medical Economics from March of 2023, I cite, when it comes to Generation X physicians, nearly 60% say they plan to retire by age 60, and data shows they are making a move in that direction, with 12% of those aged 51 to 60 already working part-time. The research confirms that the desired retirement age is trending younger due to a complexity of factors. So let's look a little bit of what are the reasons to retire versus not retire, which is usually one of the main reasons why I end up seeing some of my doctor patients. The main three reasons to retire are the burnout that has already been talked about, the lost sense of autonomy, and health concerns. And when I talk about health concerns, I include the psychological stress. Let's move to the loss of autonomy. And in the last couple of decades, the loss of autonomy has been more intensely perceived due to a multitude of factors, a very important one being the disappearance, at least in the United States, of way too many private practices. What it used to be a community of doctors, like Junita was saying, is now a mass of doctors who ended up doing corporate medicine, in which any one of them can easily be replaced by a different doctor, a physician assistant, or a nurse practitioner who knows, ChatGPT or a more sophisticated AI. The disillusionment, despair, and alienation give birth to neurotic responses such as depression, aggression, and addiction. And but in my opinion, the main ones are the depression and addiction. The third reason of retirement is self-concern, health concerns, and different, so to say, blows of fate. The years of long and stressful calls, poor and irregular sleep, less than ideal eating habits, leave their marks and combine with unavoidable aging, trigger health crises and chronic ailments. The blows of fate usually include family circumstances related to partners, children, and many times old and sick or dying parents. In these circumstances, it is very difficult not to react with anxiety, despair, and fatalism, especially when things happen suddenly, and those involved need to take fast and hopefully wise decisions, sometimes life-altering decisions. For example, a physician who suffered a massive myocardial infarction or stroke, or an addiction that impacts patient care, that doctor needs to go to rehab. So they will, and regardless of what the health concern is, they will have to make some changes in order to protect themselves, but at the same time to protect their patients. Next, thank you. I have heard a number of powerful questions asked at this stage, and I will cite a couple of them. One is, how can I still be a doctor when I'm sick myself? How can I best write the last chapter of my life? Will I still be me if I'm not doctoring any longer? In my next slide, I'm sorry, I think I am, Junita, can you go to the next slide, the next one? Okay, thank you. In this slide, I am listing a multitude of techniques that I found most helpful to use in order to find the answer to the priorly mentioned questions. But I'm not going to go into their details. As we learned in logotherapy, we can rely on the medical ministry to help us point out value meanings that remain intact in physicians' life. I think a particular attention should be given to the neurotic dimension, and I will explain that. Aging brings with it an increase in losses, a decrease in areas of value, and an increase in the number of things that cannot be changed. It sounds kind of fatalistic, right? Well, we all know the physical dimension progressively restricts. The psychic one becomes more and more inflexible, but there is a noetic dimension that can still be expanded, as Elizabeth Lucas taught us. I often invite my patients to look at this stage as a wonderful opportunity to behave almost like adolescents who have to decide what to be when they grow up. Only that now one does not have the luxury of time. By contrary, the time is limited like never before. But that is not all bad. As Frankl said, finality and temporality are factors in meaningfulness. In the prior stages of life, one could say, well, I will do it later, but now later is definitely not an option. And that pressure gives permission to be daring and resurrect old talents, desires, dreams, and make them reality. After talking about the reasons to retire, let's go back and look a bit at the main reasons to delay retirement. The doctor's concern for their patients is one of them, as it is not having interests outside medicine, financial obligations, and the fear of losing their identity. In my experience, this last one comes up the most often, and I'm not sure if that's just due to the fact that I have a skewed group of doctors that come to see me in the office. As you see, the values that direct their lives as physicians continue to be held. They still have concerns about their patients, a factor that may sometimes delay their own retirement. Many of them have been their patients for a very long time. They have a relationship. And as you know, leaving them is a loss on both sides, and that involves some grief. And also, as you know, grief is a complex and painful process that is not always acknowledged appropriately. I hear people say that something feels wrong, something is missing, I feel like crying and don't know why. And when we go in a little deeper into what's going on, the fact that they lost those relationships do play a major role in it. When it comes to not having interests outside medicine, I honestly have to say that I personally don't know doctors who do not have interests outside of medicine. Maybe they don't have the time to really pursue them, or that their interests outside of medicine are not as important or as fulfilling to them as medicine is. And their final decision sometimes is to either engage in a phased retirement or continue to practice at a lower scale, basically part-time. When we talk about the fear of losing their identity, this is the one that comes most often in my discussion with my patients. Retiring changes the status and the identity of the individual from being a doctor to being a retiree. Retiree being something not very well defined, sometimes something that needs to be individualized. Even when retirement is embraced with open arms and excitement, the novelty of the so-called permanent vacation wears off in a few months. The individuals start missing the structure of their days, longing for the social aspects of their work, for the fulfillment provided by a job well done. They start experiencing boredom, and as you know, boredom is a sign of loss of meaning and is more prominent in industrialized and affluent societies. Adjusting to the new status is a process during which some doctors end up experiencing existential neuroses, existential frustration with discontent, boredom, feelings of meaninglessness, existential vacuum. The two powerful questions come up in this phase of retirement. And those are, first one is who am I now? And the others are who needs me and how can I help? To answer the first question of who am I now involves to go back on the memory lane and look and process me of the past, me I am today, and me I want to become. In my opinion, it's a unique and golden chance to look at the meaning of one's own life, work, death, and sometimes, the need to reinvent oneself. Most workers in the healthcare, and I'm not talking only about doctors, choose their line of work because they thrive when they help. And asking questions such as who needs me and how can I be helpful is to be expected. And by asking these questions, many doctors find out that they still have something to give. There are doctors who work temporary jobs as locums even after they retire, or they retire from seeing patients, but they don't completely sever the bond with the medicine and choose to teach medical students, to be mentors to their generation of children or even grandchildren, or to work for a medical publication, or you name it. There are many choices they have, and to still stay in contact with medicine and also help others. In the end, I will cite Viktor Franklin for his, I would say, very wonderful advice that I keep pretty much saying to each of my patients when they are in this stage of life and career, which is live as you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as strongly as you are about to act now. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Good job powering through. Charles let me know that even though the recording will end, that there may be a little bit of wiggle room for some questions running up. He said we could go till 5 till. So obviously, those of you that need to be excused, thank you so much for joining us today. We are grateful that you were here. We're grateful for the comments. But if I could, let me open it up to some discussions, or I already see people sharing in the chat room. Keep an eye on that too. Open your chat. Some of these may not need our comments, they're just people sharing.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for a beautiful presentation, all three of you. It's good to see you in kind of person. I remember I used to share this story with my logotherapy students, thinking this was an example of someone choosing a career that others would not approve of. And now I'm thinking she could have used a good logotherapist. This was a physician who was the only physician in a small town, rural town, overloaded, burned out with all of the no one to help her, insurance issues, etc. I put this in the chat also. And so there was a picture of her in the papers leaning against a semi-tractor trailer. She had left medicine, was now a long-distance trucker, and apparently very happy in her 30s. And now I'm thinking she must have loved medicine to have gone all through medical school. And wouldn't it have been wonderful if someone could have helped her with the issues she was facing? Because I can't imagine she was alone, and many physicians face this feeling alone, no one to help them kind of issue.
I think that's true. My pseudo-stoicism comment often is about that kind of veneer people, physicians will put on, that they're perfectly fine, as they're like clenched, and not being able to recognize the emotions that they are having, and to ask for help, and to be vulnerable and humble. These kinds of things are very difficult often for physicians. I see a question in the chat about medical ministry. So the question was, could you comment more on the concept of medical ministry? And I clarified whether or not medical ministry was meant in the way he talks about it towards the end of Doctor and the Soul. Does anybody want to tackle that one, or I am happy to tackle that one too?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do it.
Okay, the way I think about medical ministry is that basically Frankl and Doctor and the Soul saw logotherapy as medical ministry, right? Logotherapy and existential analysis was meant for physicians to add on in the care of their patients to address spiritual concerns. And so medical ministry, is a term that kind of did not stay in favor in Frankl's later works when he talked about logotherapy. But I think of logotherapy as synonymous with medical ministry. Doctor and the Soul was written for physicians, right? This was meant to be an academic piece. He was talking to his fellow colleagues, and he was urging them to add the principles of logotherapy as a kind of medical ministry to their patients to supplement in a very important way aspects of human suffering that he knew were not being addressed through the normal kind of medical model of taking care of the body and the psyche. And so I think, when we are talking about logotherapeutic techniques, we are talking about medical ministry in the care of our physicians. Now, do we teach our physicians to turn around and participate in medical ministry? I mean, for many of them, I think, I gave some of the saddest stories without the happy endings. Cheryl gave us a great happy ending. I would say that many of our clients, as they do their own work, do move into positions, whether it's in their clinical care or their leadership or so forth, of beginning to teach what they know about their own journeys to others. So I think that's often an outgrowth, is their own medical ministry, even though they didn't sit through a Frankl course. They are living logotherapy, right? Which often is even more powerful. Nancy, I see your hand up.
Thank you very much. It's so wonderful presentation, both of you. It's one of them I want to remark is about the important is the logotherapy in this time. In London, in the very important newspaper, like Standard, also Time in New York, talking about Viktor Frankl. Talking about this approach because it's one of the many researchers is working about meaning, about without expectation, but also what you say, Janetta and Gabriela, is about community. Because we haven't one politician behavior or policy is one myself with sociality, but many research, so in UK, that is not working from 5 years or 7 years ago. We come back for the community. We come back for the people or some older people had a lot of experience to be volunteers, to be more able to give up experience. So it's connecting with Viktor Frankl, it's connecting what we do. So it's great to hear the work you're doing in the description research. Thank you very much and congratulations, because that is so important to push the knowledge and also give data. Why is important the logotherapy in the psychoeducation, intervention, and also this research. And so in UK, I'll let you know, the NHS is come back to the volunteer sector to asking us how we say we need to work with the people, because they don't know. But that philosophy is coming for the same legado of Viktor Frankl. It's like monanthropism, it's like to recognize the cycle life. And so beautiful presentation, so happy, and congratulations.
Go ahead, Kazuki. You're muted. You're muted. Good.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentation. and it's really scary. I'm scared. So I chose a different profession. So yeah. But the question is if doctors at the different stages have those serious concerns. There are some kind of community model where physicians can share and discuss those matters. Even at the medical school, like a cohort model, and first year, second year, third year, and also residencies, and they have common issues and challenges, and some attorneys they have some cohort and create friendship and share the things so that they do not burn out like assistant attorneys. They share each other, like 200 cases every time, and kind of thing with low salary. So yes, just a question.
Thank you. I'm actually going to pitch that question to Cheryl, who is hiding the fact that she is a JD, but also this is exactly what she does. Cheryl, could you comment on that?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts about that. And thank you for that question. I work with students over 4 years. That's my baseline. I also stay in touch with my students who've graduated. I now have students who are in their 10th year post-MD who still correspond with me. I hold a weekly session. It's just an open session. Everybody, all of my alumni have the link to it. Month to month, out of 126 physicians in various stages of practice, from intern to associate professor level. I have maybe 2 a month who have time to show up. And when they show up, they're like, oh my gosh, I want to be here. I want to be here every month, but I have all these other things. And here's what my institution is telling me today. And they sent me this survey saying, this was a great quote from one of my 10-year graduates. I got this survey from the institution I'm working for now saying, tell us how you find meaning in the work that you do for us. Which I thought was like, wow. I mean, she got it. She understood. It's the wrong question. And she said, I wish that I had time. I can't. They're so busy. They're exactly what Joanna and Gabby talked about, and Janita said. They're so busy and they're so pressed. As far as lawyers go, I chose not to practice law. I am a licensed attorney, and I have, I'm a member of 3 bar associations around the state of Texas. And so, yeah, I love visiting with my attorney friends because there is such a different take on life, such a different sense of collegiality. And yeah, thank you for your question. Time sign.
Charles says we're done. Thank you, everyone. We're going to get off the Zoom, go on to your next groups. We so appreciate your attention and your loving concern for our physicians in the world. Bye now.
Yeah.